This happened in 1996 in my hometown of about 100,000 people. I was 15 years old from the suburbs and went to a high school in the city. I finished with class and for some reason I decided to walk to the main bus station instead of just waiting at the nearest bus stop. I stood at the gate that my bus line number 15 starts from. Another bus line number 17 also starts from the same gate. After waiting for about 10 minutes, a man asks me if bus number 17 is taken off yet. I say yes, I'm sorry, you just missed it. The man, who looked to be at least 30, maybe 40, then introduces himself to me as Mark. He stretches out his hand for me to shake it. I didn't want to be impolite, so I do. I introduce myself as Maya. My name is not Maya. It was bizarre to me that a grown man was introducing himself to me at a bus station. I may have been 15, but I knew better. He asked me if I just finished school. I say yes. Then he asks me what school I go to. I lie. Then asks if I'm going home. I say no, even though I am. Then asks me where I'm going, and I say to a friend's house. My bus pulls up and I get on it. Strangely, this man, Mark, gets on as well. I know for a fact he'd asked me if number 17 had taken off yet. If he was originally planning on going on number 17, there is absolutely no reason to get on my bus, number 15. They don't have a single stop in common. I sit down and he sits himself next to me. He asks me which year of high school I'm in. I lie for some reason and say I'm a junior. I was actually a freshman at the time. He says I look too young to be a junior. I say I hear that all the time. Then he asks me if I have a boyfriend and I say no, and he says that I should. I then ask him where he is going and he says he's going home. I ask if he isn't planning on taking number 17. He says no, and tells me he lives at the very end of bus line 15. That was odd. I've never seen him on the bus before. He asked me if I'm on my way home as well, and I say no, that I'm visiting a friend. Looking back, he knew I was lying. I was sure he believed me, and I really thought I had the situation under control. I should have walked to the bus driver and told him what was going on. I didn't because I was just scared, and I didn't want to make a scene out of nothing. There were plenty of people around, and while he was strange, I really thought that he was just a harmless, lonely weirdo. We get to my stop. I purposely miss it, and I get off at the next one, thinking I'll fool him and then just walk home a bit longer. To my surprise, he gets off as well, and I ask him where he's going, and he says he wants to walk me home. Again, I tell him that I'm not going home. I'm visiting a friend. He says that's fine, he'll walk me. I say he really doesn't need to, and in a stern, irritated tone, he tells me to shut up and walk. There is no one on the street now. We are the only ones who got off the bus here. I'm alone with this weird man who followed me from the bus station. I can't go home because I don't want him to know where I live. I start panicking and I don't know what to do, so I just freeze and stand there, silent. In an instant, he went from weird but chatty and smiley to telling me to shut up, and I went from feeling in control to knowing I really fucked up. He put his hand on my shoulder and tells me that he doesn't have much time, so we should get going. I want to tell him that he clearly does, but I don't want to anger him more, so I just nod. He tells me that if I'm good, I don't have to be scared of him. I lie and say I'm not scared. He asks me if that means I plan on being good. I say yes. He forced me to repeat it in a whole sentence. Yes, I will be good. I begin walking. I don't know where I was going, I just walked. He walked with me, with his hand on my shoulder still. I was never religious growing up, but I remember praying that I don't pass out. My heart was beating so fast and breathing was difficult. I was sure I was about to collapse and die. Then I spotted an older man tending to his garden in front of a house. That's the last thing I remember. I have a vague memory of running. I was later told that I was screaming for help while running towards the older man, while Mark ran off. The older man called the police and they contacted my parents. The police couldn't do anything but take my statement. Since my parents both worked and couldn't take me to and from school, they bought me a new phone the very same day. This was in the 90s when mobile phones were a luxury. I wish the story ended here. After the event, I only ever got on the bus at the stop right in front of my school. A few weeks passed, and I did so like I did any other day. We locked eyes as soon as I stepped on. He was on the bus with the biggest grin on his face, like he couldn't be more excited to see me. I was so creeped out, I immediately got off and ran into the school. I called my mom in tears, and she had me find a teacher to walk me to her car when she came to get me. The school was then notified on the situation. After that, he was spotted walking around the school several times, sometimes a few days in a row, but sometimes he wasn't seen for weeks. The police were of no help. They couldn't do anything until he actually hurt me, or showed up on school property or at my home. I spent the rest of the year waiting in the school until late afternoon so my mom could pick me up after work. We always took a very long route home. I now know that she was making sure we weren't being followed. My parents then had me switch schools. Thankfully, he was never spotted in my neighborhood, and I'm very sure he never found out my name or got my address. I only ever saw him one more time. I was 21, in my hometown, on summer break from university. I saw him in a grocery store in a whole different part of town. He didn't seem to recognize me, didn't even really look at me, but I immediately recognized him. Where I live, there is no convicted criminal list like in the US. Such cases are not reported, and I never found out the man's full name. I have no idea who he is or what he has done in the past. I don't know what he would have done to me. My belief is that he might have been mentally challenged, saw me, liked me, and followed me. My mother believes that it was much more complex, that he was planning something, that he knew exactly where we were going. My dad still doesn't talk about it. I'm just happy he's out of my life. I know it's still February, but I'm writing this story because I can't wait for summer, and I strongly dislike the cold, windy winter weather. This story happened to me back in the summer of 2018, when I was transitioning into the 8th grade. I went to a sleepaway camp in the Appalachian Mountains. I considered it a second home for me. I didn't really have to worry about schoolwork, besides summer homework, and I made some of the greatest friends I had ever had there. This is one of my main reasons why summer is my favorite season. I got along with literally everyone at the camp, except this one person made me see how dangerous people can really be. That summer, there was a new counselor whose name was Art. He looked to be about in his 50s, due to his white hair and his slightly wrinkled skin. Being a camp counselor in your 50s does not seem right to me. I don't know about you guys, but it gives off pedophile vibes to me. When I and my bunk first met him, he seemed like a trustworthy person, though. For the first week of camp, he helped us clean out our bunk when it was dirty, and talked to us whenever we were feeling down. I and my bunk didn't have any problem with him from the start, but the girls around camp would talk behind Art's back. They would say something like, "He's a creepy old man that probably preys on children." After all, he is way older than all the other counselors, so I can see where they were coming from. One night, things got a little intense. We had a recess night where we got to do whatever we wanted to, and I and my fellow bunkmates played tennis with each other. During the game, Art would watch us the whole time. During that time, he would give off a big grin that looked like how Pennywise the Clown from It would grin. I actually thought this was creepy. Why was he smiling like that? Was he really who the girls say he is? Part of me thought he was just admiring how much fun we were all having. It didn't stop there though. Another night, when I came out of the shower, I saw a shaving cream bottle. Now this is when I was starting to go through my puberty phases, but I didn't have any facial hair yet. I walked over to the bottle where it was on the bathroom sink, and I grabbed it and examined the whole thing. As soon as I did that though, I felt tense hand grips touch my arms. I turned around to see who it was, and it was Art. His facial expression had such a strong demeanor. He then spoke. "Listen to me, you little cunt. I'm not gonna have you ever touch my belongings, you got that?" I didn't know what was going on because everything was happening so fast. I was really scared, so I just complied with, "Yes, good. You better not do it again, or else I'm going to kill you," he threatened. I then walked out of the bathroom with my bathrobe still on, and I was still shaking from what had just happened seconds ago. I was surprised to see no one else in the bunk had even heard the whole encounter. I didn't feel comfortable telling anyone about this. It was just embarrassing. Later, I was able to cool off, but from there, I will try my best to avoid Art as much as I can. It was now the end of the first week of camp, and one last thing happened that almost made me want to go home and never return to the camp. It was like a Tuesday or Wednesday night on the second week of camp, and I and my bunk were just heading back from moving night, which the camp decided to do that night. It was also Art's night off. This made me happy because I didn't feel safe around him, knowing that he threatened me days before. I got back to the cabin, and about 15 minutes inside the cabin, I heard someone screaming from a distance. There were definitely like 10 little girls screaming. This went on for another minute, and then it stopped. I and all my other bunkmates looked at each other in confusion as to what could possibly be going on out there. We had 3 counselors present with us that night, and 2 counselors told us to stay here as they were going to investigate what was happening, while the other counselor stayed with us. We all listened and stayed put. About an hour and a half passed, and our 2 counselors were still gone. Something major had to have happened. It was also time for lights out, and so the counselor who was still with us turned the lights off, and we were all in bed. I guess we would all find out what really happened the next morning. Morning time then came, and we were eating breakfast at the camp's dining hall. We were allowed to sit wherever we wanted to, so that's what we did. I sat down with a few of my bunkmates, and some other girls sat down with us. As we were eating, one of the girls finally told us the whole story of what happened last night. One of the younger girls' cabins heard some noises from their bedroom last night, while their counselors were outside talking to each other. The girls went to go see what the noise was, and when they reached the bottom stall where the noise was coming from, they opened the door, and they all saw the one and only 50-year-old counselor, Art, sitting on the toilet with his pants down, revealing his genitals. He then smiled and said, "Hey, pretty girls." That is when all the girls screamed and ran out of the cabin, which were the screams we heard. They ran so far deep into the woods while one of the 2 of their counselors followed behind. Art was still inside of the bathroom while 2 of their counselors remained at the cabin, and the other counselors, including 2 of mine, went inside. They all saw him sitting on the toilet with his pants down. That's when 3 male counselors wrestled Art to the ground and held him down there. Another counselor then called for the camp police on his walkie-talkie and said everything that all went down. When the police arrived, Art was still down in the same position, and that's when he was taken away in the police car. He was still in custody that morning, and that young girl had to sleep in a couple of other girls' cabins because they were clearly not safe there. Everyone at my table just stopped eating, and all of our jaws were dropped. I'm sure every other table was talking about it as well. My heart went out to all the little girls who had seen true terror last night. I did one more summer after that summer at the sleepaway camp, and nothing that severe had happened again. Art obviously never returned again to the camp, and I wouldn't be too surprised if he is still being held in some sort of institution to keep him away from children. Monsters like him should be held in prison for a very long time, maybe even life. I hope he is getting all the hard time he deserves in prison, because child predators like him don't belong in this world.
My husband had remained close to his childhood friend, who I'll call John, well into adulthood. They had met in elementary school and became inseparable ever since. When I was dating my husband and met John, I thought he was such a nice guy. He had a very docile nature and a wholesome character. Everyone felt comfortable around him. John was the type of person that could get along with anyone. He was trustworthy, dependable, and genuinely kind. I was happy that my husband was able to keep such a good friend in this day and age when true friendships are so hard to find. Both me and my husband are estranged from our families, so we were lucky to have someone like John in our lives, and we considered him like family. John was a nerd, like us, so we had many of the same interests. We would meet up every once in a while to grab something to eat, catch a movie, or just hang out at the house playing retro board games and discussing technology. We all 3 had a love of computers, so my husband and John often shared with each other small programs that they could write. My husband and I built computers for a time, and John would come by to give his opinion and advise us on our projects. I suppose the only curious thing about John at that point was that he never really had a girlfriend. In all the years we knew him, he had always been single. He never even dated. I didn't understand why such a nice guy hadn't found someone yet. Our lives seemed to evolve and change, but John just sort of stayed where he had always been, living with his family, and never became involved with anyone romantically. And for a while there, we started thinking that maybe he was gay and was simply scared to reveal it, since he had a pretty traditional family who he was very close to. And though we wondered amongst ourselves, we never brought it up to him as it seemed kind of inappropriate. It would be like we were invading his privacy or meddling in his life, and we figured that he would eventually find someone when he was ready. John suddenly moved away to a city that was 3 hours away. When he told us, we thought at first that he had decided to finally move on his own, but we were wrong. He had actually moved into a home that his older sister had bought for her retirement. Since she wasn't ready to retire just yet, she was letting him stay there for the time being, and that's when things began to change. John sort of fell off the map. He wouldn't call, he wouldn't visit nor ask us to come visit him. My husband and I figured it was because of the distance. Also, he was probably settling into his new place and getting accustomed to a new city. But time continued passing, and I could tell my husband was really missing his friend. And I had to admit that I was too. We had such good times together, and it was so unlike John to disconnect like that. It was so difficult to get in contact with him on the phone, and he wasn't very active on his social media either. And I started to worry about him. I also didn't want my husband to continue distancing himself from his best friend, as it could become permanent. And so I made it my mission to reignite our friendship. I called John and arranged for us to go visit him. Surprisingly, he didn't seem to even acknowledge the fact that it had been about 2 years since we had last seen each other. When we arrived at his place, I was taken a little aback, as I hadn't been expecting what I saw. The house was in a pretty secluded neighborhood in the middle of nowhere, actually, and I didn't know how he could get used to it here, going from a big city and all. And also, I hate to say this, but the house seemed dirty and messy, and John told us that he had transferred his job to this new city. Even though they offered him a promotion, he had declined it, and he didn't want to work the extra hours. I looked around and thought that this made sense, since it seemed like John didn't like leaving the house very much, and I chuckled to myself as I thought the house looked more like a bunker than a home. To my dismay, I saw that John had his own room, as if he was still a teenager. In fact, it was decorated as if that is exactly what he still was. It was a mess in there. Computers and computer equipment on the floor, wires everywhere, clothes thrown about all over the place. And John said his sister came to stay every other weekend, so she had the main bedroom for herself. He expressed how he hated for his privacy to be interrupted when she stayed over, but what could he do? And I thought to myself that he could just get his own place, but I didn't say it out loud. We all decided to go to dinner and browse some of the stores in the area, and I couldn't help myself any longer and asked John why we had lost contact. It had become so difficult to get a hold of him lately, and he kind of just shrugged it off and said that he had been so busy with the move that he must have lost track of time. He didn't ever want to lose contact like that with us again, and he appeared genuine, but something felt off to me. His answers were too short and generic, as if there had been some sort of script or he had practiced somehow. My husband told him that he thought that he would have had his own place by now since he moved all the way out here, and John said that it was just financially easier this way. Again, another short and very generic reply. I asked him if he was seeing anyone, and he said that he wasn't in a position to really do that right now, as he really wanted to get his finances in order first. I thought that every reply he gave made sense and was perfectly reasonable, but I also knew that he was lying. Rather, he was hiding. I just didn't know what it was. It was just this nagging feeling that I couldn't shake off, and John just didn't seem like the person that we had known once. My husband and I drove home, kind of confused but glad that we had spent some time with our old friend, and it had been a long time coming. John certainly answered all of the questions that we had been curious about. We believed that now that we had resumed contact that we would see more of him, but that didn't happen. John continued to be distant. His social media continued to not be updated, but I did notice something strange. Since I have him as a friend, I could see whatever he did that was public. And I noticed that he was liking Nickelodeon programs and would sometimes make comments on their posts. The comments would just mention how good a show's last episode was, or how he couldn't wait to find out what happened next. And I found this kind of odd. His comments also seemed to have been written by someone much younger and not a man in his late 30s, who still watched kids' programs at that age. Oh well, I just chalked it up to John always having been sort of innocent, I guess. And besides, some adults still watch cartoons, right? I suppose there isn't anything too weird then with an adult liking kids' sitcoms. And I didn't mention it to my husband. I'm not sure why. I just felt like I was, once again, a little nosy, invading John's privacy somehow. After all, it's not like I had purposely searched for this information. Besides, what would be the point of even mentioning it? It's just TV shows. And over the next couple of years, John visited us one time. Once again, I had to make a monumental effort to get him to meet with us, even though he traveled our way often to visit his mother. And I got this uncanny feeling that John was avoiding us. Again, as if he was hiding, but hiding what? My husband had pretty much accepted the fact that his friendship had somehow grown apart, and things would never be as they were before. No point of continuing to force the situation, and I resigned myself to that fact as well. It happens. I figured it happened more commonly with childhood friends since people do tend to go in different directions in adulthood. Some more time passed and my husband mentioned John to me. He told me that he had wondered what he'd been up to and how it seemed like no matter how hard he tried, he kept losing contact with him. I could tell my husband was annoyed and couldn't call John because he was upset, and I decided to just give him a call myself. I hoped he still had his same number, and luckily he did. John informed me that he had recently moved back in with his mother. She needed him to be closer to her due to her ailing health, and I told him it was good he was back because we were planning on visiting my father so we could swing by and see him as well. And for the first time, John actually sounded strained and evasive. It didn't sound like himself at all. He told me that he really hadn't been expecting to move back, so he was having trouble getting settled in. And for this reason, he said that he would not be able to meet with us this soon. We would have to meet the following month. And that struck me as strange since his mother's house was the house he grew up in. He had his own bedroom there, so why would it be so difficult to settle in? I accepted his wishes, though, and told him that the following month we would plan on hanging out for sure. Nothing could have prepared me and my husband for what happened next, though. As the month we were supposed to meet approached, my husband called me to come downstairs and look at the TV. He then said to hurry, and I thought he was just being dramatic since he sometimes did so to get me to go see what he was watching, so I reluctantly went downstairs. I immediately noticed that he was white as a sheet. Now he had my attention, and I asked him what in the world was wrong now. He told me to look at this as he holds the remote in his hand, pointing it to the TV. And I sat down next to him, and he starts playing a news segment that was showing a courtroom. Suddenly, John is led in by a bailiff wearing an orange suit with his hands and feet shackled, and I literally did a double take as I couldn't believe that it was the same person. I thought my husband was joking and was playing a video showing John or a look-alike like John, but there was no denying it was truly him. His full name was right there on the screen. The newscaster said that yet another man, John, has just been arrested in connection with one of the largest child trafficking rings that has been dismantled in recent history. John was just one of the many individuals who had been caught when the police successfully obtained their information from a website on the dark web that had been shut down for featuring and spreading CSAM, or child exploitation material. The investigation had been going on for a few years. Both of our mouths were wide open as we stared at the TV in disbelief. My husband told me that he had been searching for a local TV show when he came across this. He told me he just couldn't believe it. He must have watched it over 20 times before he called me downstairs to see for myself, and I was speechless. Sometime later, when the initial shock subsided, my husband went online to search more information, and it appears that John's mother's home and his sister's home had both been raided, and they found hundreds of child exploitation content on his computer. John must have been collecting them since his youth. There also had been a DNA match. There wasn't much more information than that, and I was thankful for it as neither of us wanted to know what exactly that meant. John is going to be going to prison for the next 30-plus years, and he'll be an old man by the time he makes it to his first parole hearing and would have to wear an ankle monitor for the remaining years if he was ever to actually be released. And we saw that his sister removed his name from the house that she had bought. She also removed all mention of him from her social media, and for his family to have disowned him, the details of what John did must be truly horrific, and it's obvious his family has no doubt of his guilt. I feel so sorry for his poor mother. She was such a sweet lady. She had already lost 2 sons, and now she lost a third. My husband and I removed John from our contact list and any trace of him from our social media as well. We severed all ties. We decided to not even contact his family, and we will not be visiting him in prison either, though we have so many unanswered questions. This event broke my husband somehow. He has become very paranoid and distrustful of other people, and he's refused to make any new friends. I can understand him, though. It's life-changing when you realize that you never truly know anyone, regardless of how close you are to them. Not really, anyway. The sweet, humble guy that had slept in our home and shared so many great times with us had been an illusion. A very good magic trick. It's as if he hadn't ever existed except in our own minds. John had been hiding something after all, and he had been hiding that he was really a monster.
I used to work at a gas station. This was right at the beginning of January, after all the holidays. Around here, it gets insanely cold this month. I was working a later shift this night. Not a full overnight shift, but I think I was scheduled until 3 a.m. Anyway, it was snowing a bit, though it was really windy out and close to 10 degrees. Even just being outside for a few minutes was painful. Only a handful of customers even came through. Around 12 though, a man came inside the store. It startled me because I didn't hear his car pull in. The man didn't go any further into the shop though, he just stood by the door. I greeted him and he smiled and nodded, then stood there and looked out the glass door. My eyes shifted to the outside as well, and I noticed there weren't any cars. He must have walked here. "How are you doing tonight, sir?" I said, striking up a casual conversation. He looked at me and said he was fine and that he was just taking shelter inside while he waited for his ride to get here. I said it was all good and that he could stay as long as he needed. I still didn't fully understand his situation, but it was whatever. I made myself busy, stocking some of the shelves and tidying up the place. But an hour went by, and the man was still standing there, waiting. I asked if he wanted to use the phone to call or something, but he said no, and just kept waiting. I mean, yeah, it was really bad outside, but waiting this long was strange. Even him just walking here was strange. Like, where did he even come from? I went back around the counter and stood there. I didn't know what else to say to him. I waited another 30 minutes, spacing out and occasionally checking my phone, when the guy suddenly stood up a little straighter and looked at me. His eyes were dull, instantly sending a chill through me. I was gonna ask if everything was okay, but a light glared through the window. A car was pulling in. They came right up to the spot near the door and parked. Nobody got out though. I looked back at the man. He was still staring at me, but then he opened the door and walked out into the snow and up to the car. The driver rolled the window down, and instead of him getting in, they talked for a minute. Something in my gut felt wrong about this. It seemed like they were planning something, and I wasn't going to take the risk. I walked around the counter and hurried up to the door, locking it shut. The man immediately whipped his eyes back at me. He rushed to the door, trying to pull it open angrily. Then the man in the car got out and did the same thing, trying to get the door back open. They were pissed off. I ran back to the counter and called the police, just hoping they didn't have anything to break the door with. Thankfully, once they saw me on the phone though, they got in the car and drove away. Obviously, they were planning something. What it was, I don't know. They were never found. I was at home. As far as I was aware, this was a normal night. It was the middle of winter and it was snowing outside. I'd gotten home from work, made dinner, and went to bed. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to a noise, like the creak of a wooden floorboard or the roof or something. It was a loud groaning creak as well, which made me think it might be a leak in the roof. I wasn't too nervous, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep if I didn't at least do a quick check around. I got up, leaving the lights off so as to not wake myself too much. I lazily walked into the hallway and opened the spare room. It was full of workout equipment. I looked up at the ceiling, and there was no water damage or anything. I also didn't hear any loud winds from outside. I wondered if it was even snowing still. I walked over to the window and pushed the curtains aside. It was snowing, but not very hard at all. I didn't know what to think about that. Maybe I was exaggerating how loud the creak was. Still, I figured I should check the other room while I was up. I walked over and opened the door, looking up at the ceiling. Again, there was nothing to see. I took a few steps into the room though, and suddenly my foot was cold and wet. There was a damp spot on the carpet, like it was soaked in water. I looked directly up again, thinking there must be a leak I couldn't see, but there wasn't. I turned on the light, and now I could see several, maybe a dozen, of these water spots, all in a line, going from the window to the door. I walked back out into the hallway. The spots continued through the hallway and up to my bedroom. My heart started pounding. I looked through the doorway and froze when I saw them go further into my bedroom. I didn't stay to see any more. I ran to the kitchen, got my keys, and drove out. By the time an officer came to check my home, nobody was in there. Maybe they had already been gone by the time I woke up. I really don't know. The thought that someone could have been in my room that night while I was sleeping still just makes me so uneasy. It was unlikely I wouldn't have stepped in one of those water spots when I walked out of my bedroom though, so maybe they snuck into my bedroom while I was in the workout room, looking out the window, but I don't know if that makes me feel any better. The creak I heard was almost definitely them opening the window and getting in, or I guess it could have also been them leaving. However it happened, and whatever was going to happen, I guess I'll never know. I'm a 28-year-old male. I live in a small house in a regular neighborhood. The town I live in is in the suburbs, but it's right on the edge of a huge forest that stretches on for hundreds of miles. I like to take walks through some of the small trails that came near my backyard, though I usually didn't have time until later in the night. I didn't mind though, putting on a headlamp and having the trails to myself. This night, it wasn't too cold, so around 8, I threw on my coat and started walking. It was calm and quiet, like always. But when I got a little further in, I thought I heard something. I stopped and looked out into the woods. There was someone out there. He looked like a kid. It was way too dark, and they were too far for me to tell much, but they were probably 8 to 10 years old, and they were alone. Now, even though I took this trail a lot, I'd never gone out past it. Like, it was just uncharted forest. I'd probably get lost in minutes. So I was concerned for this kid. "Are you okay? The way back is down this trail over here." The kid didn't move. I took a few steps into the woods and called out to them again. I wasn't sure what else to do. Go out and help them, or go back and call someone. I thought if I left, the chances of someone finding them later would only be worse. I started walking, continually asking them to follow me out, but the kid only began to back up. Not like running away as if he were scared, but they were staying within sight of me, and almost like they were leading me further into the forest. In the moment, I was oblivious to it though. I was just so dead set on trying to help this kid. I followed them for a couple of minutes, getting pretty deep into the unknown areas of the forest, when the kid suddenly walked behind something. There was a structure. It looked like a small shed, very old and worn. But what was it doing here in the middle of the forest? I thought the kid must have gone in there, but before I could check, I heard footsteps. They were heavy, definitely a larger person. My stomach dropped, and I instantly felt like this was some sort of trap. I shut off my light and fled back the way I came. I got on the trail and ran home, then called 911. They said they had no reports of missing children, but an officer came by and ended up walking back out with me. I took him to where the shed was, but at the time, nobody was there. This was stagnant for a while, and I assumed nothing else of it. But a few weeks later, the city went back to tear the shed down, since it wasn't supposed to be built on public forest lands, and I guess during that, they found something. Apparently something there linked to some sort of kidnapping. It's not very clear how or what it was that they found. They never fully released all the info on it. It was kept private. I'm not sure why. I don't know who that kid was I saw out there, or the person's footsteps I heard, but I can't seem to stop thinking about it. Was it really a trap? Maybe I'm an idiot, but part of me feels like it was some kind of vision or something, leading me to what was going on out there. This was a few years ago, during winter. I was working from home as a customer service rep. This night, I had an afternoon shift from 4 p.m. to 12. I went up to my office, closed the door, and started working at my desk. The first half of my shift was normal. It went by quickly, and I took my break to eat dinner, then got back to it. After that, it was much slower, so I was mostly just sitting at my desk staring at the blank screen and waiting for any tickets to come through. But out of nowhere, there was something behind me. A noise, kind of loud, from somewhere in the house. I took my headphones off and looked at the door, then walked over and opened it to listen for it again. There were no other sounds though. I thought it was nothing, and I couldn't be away from my desk for too long anyway, so I just left the door open and went back to work. I forgot about it quickly, as there weren't any other sounds or noises, at least that I could hear through my headphones, for the next several hours. It wasn't until I was nearly done with work, around 11:30ish, that I heard something again. It was softer than whatever the first sound was, but this one felt different, like it gave me a bad gut feeling, almost scaring me. I got up from my chair and went to the hallway again. I looked down and instantly a spike of fear rushed through me. The door at the end of the hallway was wide open. How was that even possible? I looked down the other end of the hallway as I just stood there in shock when I noticed a shadow on the wall move. There was someone standing at the bottom of the steps. I could just make out their figure in the shadow. I backed up into the room and locked the door, getting my phone and calling the police. I was breathing heavily and absolutely terrified as I waited, staring at the crack beneath the door, expecting them to come up to it at any minute. I never heard them come upstairs though, or even move around downstairs. And when the cops made it and got inside, nobody else was there. We have no idea how they got in or why they did. What's horrifying is that I had the door to my office open, so they had to have walked right past me, probably seeing me sitting in there with my headphones on. I don't know what they were doing, but it's been hard to get over it when I have so many questions and uncertainties.
When I was younger, my friends and I loved exploring abandoned places around the country. We mostly did it for the thrill of seeing what places looked like years after being abandoned by the previous owners. One day, after school had ended, my friend Noah told me that he found an abandoned ranch outside of town. Noah, I, and one other guy, which I will be calling Tony for the sake of his privacy, planned to later go that afternoon, after it got dark, so that we wouldn't get spotted entering the ranch. To give some backstory, Tony has always been the type of person to destroy abandoned buildings, smashing the windows, graffiti, breaking down the doors, and so on. He never really paid it any mind, since the buildings we were exploring usually were completely ruined by the time we got there. When the sun started going down and the darkness rolled in, we drove towards the ranch and parked a few hundred feet away to ensure people wouldn't associate my car with us if we were spotted entering or leaving the property. In order to get onto the property, you had to climb a 7-foot fence that surrounded the entire thing. Tony had brought some wire cutters to cut it open in a section of the fence where it was mostly covered by the surrounding forest. After cutting a hole in the fence, we squished our way through to the other side. The first thing we saw was the big decaying house, which was 70 to 80 feet from our entry point. Next to the house was a small wooden barn that looked like it had been there for over 200 years. It was disturbingly creepy to look at. Although the house was a whole other story, all the windows on the ground floor were boarded up, and the windows on the second floor were all broken. Vines were growing on the inside of the building, almost absorbing the house. The main door was also boarded up and nailed shut, so we couldn't enter through it. Noah motioned us over to the side of the house. A window wasn't boarded up down at the ground. It looked like it led to a basement of some sorts. Tony grabbed a rock and smashed the window to pieces and proceeded to crawl into the house. Both I and Noah looked at each other with uncertainty, but decided to follow Tony down into the house. The first thing we noticed was the smell. I won't say the cliche, it smells like a dead body, but the stench was almost unbearable. It smelled like a combination of rotting flesh and spoiled milk. There was next to no light in there, the only light being the light from the moon shining through the broken window. We found a staircase leading upstairs. Every step made a deep and heavy creak. The staircase led us straight into the living room. Most of the furniture in there looked old and destroyed. There was a big sofa in the middle of the room, the type of sofa that is placed on stilts, and next to it was the staircase leading up to the second floor. The house was very dark since all the windows on the ground floor were boarded up. We were slowly making our way around the room, exploring. The house had a weird feeling to it. It almost felt like someone was still living there. Black and white pictures were hung up on the walls, most of them of a family we assumed was the previous owners. The weirdest part of the pictures was that in all of the pictures, no one was smiling. They were all just staring at the camera with a blank expression. While Tony and I were looking at the pictures, Noah was wandering around in the dark. I guess he didn't watch his step because the next thing we knew, a glass object was knocked over and it shattered on the floor. The sound was heart-wrenching. We all froze as a glass shard slowly settled on the floor. Not even 5 seconds later, my worst nightmare came true. The hair on the back of my neck stood up instantly when we started hearing footsteps upstairs, right above our heads. We all looked at each other. I've never seen Noah and Tony so visibly scared before. I could feel the panic setting in. I grabbed Noah and Tony and shoved them towards the sofa. We crawled under it, trying to hide. We couldn't all fit under it though. There was only enough space for 2 people, so Tony had to hide somewhere else. There was a tall cupboard to the left of the staircase leading to the second floor. He opened it and squished himself inside. The footsteps were at the top of the staircase and slowly coming down. Noah and I were lying head to head under the sofa. His breathing was so loud that he was hyperventilating. I placed my hand over his mouth to try to make him quiet down. The creaks of the wooden floor as the footsteps reached the bottom of the staircase were a sound of pure horror. My blood ran cold as the footsteps slowly made it from the staircase and over to the sofa and then stopped. The silence was almost deafening. You never truly understand the meaning of that until you've experienced it for yourself. It was just pure silence for what felt like a minute. Then the worst scream I've ever heard broke the silence as Noah was dragged from under the sofa. His scream almost set me into a state of shock. While I was trying to get up from under the sofa, when I got up, I saw who pulled him away. It was a man with a disheveled-looking beard. I could barely make out any other details due to the lack of light. Noah was being pulled upstairs by the man. Tony also crawled out of the cupboard as Noah was screaming for help. I grabbed a shard of the broken glass on the floor, ran up the stairs, and stabbed it into the man's arm. He screamed out in pain as he let go of Noah. We all ran downstairs into the basement to try and escape the house. The window leading out from the basement was too high up though, so we had to push each other up. Tony and I pushed Noah up out the window, and then I helped Tony get up. The second Tony crawled out, I heard footsteps rushing down the staircase to the basement behind me. I jumped up and grabbed Tony's hand. The wall in the basement was wet and slippery, making it hard to get up. I screamed for Tony to pull me up as I heard water splashing behind me. The man was running across the basement straight towards me. I was halfway through the window when I felt a hand grabbing my ankle. I've never felt such fear as the man started to pull me back into the basement. I kicked back as hard as I could, hitting the man in the face. He finally let go of my ankle and I crawled out of the basement. We ran across the ranch and out towards the hole in the fence. Before we left, I looked back up towards the house, and in the upstairs window, I could see the man standing there, looking down at us. We ran out of there and over to where I parked my car, jumped in, and sped off. It's been over 6 years since this happened, and we've never gone back. Sometimes we sit and wonder, why was someone living in a boarded up and abandoned ranch? And what was he going to try and do to us?
Life is truly filled with horror stories. These traumatic events leave many people with severe and life-altering injuries, but even after the trauma, the struggle isn't over. Have you ever thought about what you would do after you got injured? If you had medical bills to pay but no ability to work? How would you know that your insurance companies or the people responsible for your injuries are being fair to you? Then, trying to navigate the situation with traditional law firms can be a daunting, confusing ordeal that brings even more pain. The piles of paperwork, the hours of your valuable time used up, and the expensive fees hitting you while you're already down. With Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm, that won't be a problem. When you're seriously hurt, your injury could be worth millions. Morgan & Morgan don't accept lowball settlements from insurance companies. In recent months, they've achieved massive victories for victims of serious car crashes. In Florida, they achieved a verdict for $12 million, which was 34 times greater than the highest insurance offer. In Philadelphia, they achieved a verdict for a $26 million payout, 40 times more than the highest settlement offered by the insurance company. Morgan & Morgan will fight for you to get the best outcome if you become their client. If you hire Morgan & Morgan, you won't just be assigned a single lawyer, but an entire dedicated legal team with lawyers, case investigators, paralegals, and customer care specialists, all working to maximize your settlement. On top of that, there are thousands of support staff available at all hours to help you with any questions or concerns about your case, making the experience as painless as possible. The best part is, you don't pay them a penny unless you win your case. And Morgan & Morgan didn't become the largest injury law firm for no reason. It's because they win a lot. Even better, they've modernized the injury law process, so it only takes minutes to see if you have a case, and you can submit your claim on your phone. If you ever get seriously injured, your case could be worth millions, and you're only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. It's easy. You can start your claim with Morgan & Morgan at www.forthepeople.com/MJV, found in the description below or by scanning the QR code on screen with your phone's camera. You can type in your name, phone number, zip code, and email address, select the type of your claim, then describe what happened. Click or tap Start Your Claim and you're done. Remember, Morgan & Morgan is the largest injury law firm in the United States, so they have all the resources and know-how to see your case through. There's no company too big for Morgan & Morgan to fight, and they'll fight for you to get the settlement you deserve if you become their client.
My husband joined the military back in 2012, and we got our first station in 2013. Shortly after working out at the military base gym, I started to notice this creepy dude was active duty and would always show up at the same time I did, and he would just stare at me and smile. He was tall, athletic build, balding a bit, nerdy, and I would guess maybe in his 30s. I personally was in my early 20s at the time, and he ended up approaching me a few times trying to make small talk, but I told him how my husband was the one active duty, hoping that he'd get the hint. I realized that I never asked this guy's name and he never gave it to me, and I didn't care to know because he creeped me out. This later turned out to be a mistake, and you'll see why. After 8 long years of going to this gym, the dude was still there every day staring at me. I was a personal trainer and left my business cards at the front desk of the gym. This is important for later. And after my husband ended his enlistment, we decided to stay in the state instead of moving back to our hometown. We found a rental house in the next town over and were so excited to start our civilian life. My husband was told that he'd be starting night shifts as a contractor for IT work, and I wanted to follow the same schedule so we wouldn't have issues with sleep. I ended up converting our living room into an awesome gym, complete with commercial equipment. This allowed me to work at night from home and train personal clients privately, kind of like a training studio. And I was tired of giving gyms a portion of my paycheck while working for them. And during this time, our schedule was as follows. My husband would leave for work at 11 p.m. and work until 7 a.m. We'd stay awake while I trained clients at home from 5 a.m. to noon and then go to bed at around 2 p.m. and sleep until around 9 p.m. I was signed up through a company called Find Your Trainer, where clients could find trainers online in their area, and the company would schedule them for sessions with me and they would prepay through the website, and it was essentially a scheduling service. One day, my phone chimed with an email saying that I had a new client scheduled for Wednesday who had purchased 6 sessions. I was excited to be making some money and watching my business grow, and when the time came for the client to show up, I was nervous but overall excited. The doorbell rang and what do you know? It was him. Because he had signed up through Find Your Trainer and not directly with me, I had no choice but to train him. I hoped that it wouldn't be too awkward, but I couldn't understand why he was willing to pay me $63 per session when he was clearly in shape and knew what he was doing at the gym. I started the first session with an arm workout, but I felt like I was wasting my time. It was obvious that he already knew how to work out, and that irritated me. I got into training to help people who actually needed assistance in transforming their health and body, and the whole session was awkward, and at one point he commented on how nice I looked that day, and I forced a smile and said thank you. For the next session, I planned to train him on back day, and as I demonstrated a lat pull down to his 6'3" body, while me being only 5'0" myself, I felt self-conscious and just wanted to get it over with. Then he told me I was doing it wrong and asked if he could show me. I was offended, considering I was the trainer in this situation, but I tried to remain professional. As I began to get up from the bench so he could correct me, he swooped in behind me and reached around to grab the handle above. But on the way to the handle, he grabbed my boob. I quickly jumped up and told him that was inappropriate and that the session was over. And that night, I texted him, saying I needed to terminate his sessions due to inappropriate behavior, and he simply responded that he understood. About 3 days later, I was up at 3 a.m. reading a book in my muumuu when I heard a noise outside. I froze and my heart began racing. Surely not. I didn't own a gun at the time and I didn't have a dog, just a parrot that liked to cuss everyone out and 2 cats. I got up and peeked through the blinds and saw a man's foot disappearing around the corner as our shed flew open. I freaked out, grabbed a butcher knife and called 911, telling them that someone was trying to break into our house. The cops arrived and searched the property but couldn't find the suspect. Several of my husband's tools had been stolen from the shed, and I filed a report and asked the police to contact the HOA to check the security cameras to see who had entered the neighborhood that night. A few days later, the police called me back with an update. They had spoken with the HOA, and as it turned out, their cameras were decoys. And that evening, we went to Walmart, and as I was entering, I saw my former client leaving. He glared at me. I couldn't help but think that it wasn't a coincidence. I had gotten rid of him without a refund, and now my husband's tools had been stolen. Surely it was him seeking revenge. The following week, my husband took me to buy my first gun and a German Shepherd. And now, it's 2025. My husband just got back on night shift yesterday, and we now own a home in a nicer neighborhood with a solid security system, but I'm always on edge, hoping that I never run into that weird stalker guy again. It all started around 18 months ago, which right now feels like a whole entire lifetime ago. I first encountered him, or at least I think I first encountered him at the diner where I used to work. I was a waitress, the kind who smiles at everyone, even the weirdos. And while he was one of those quiet types, tall, thin, with greasy black hair that hung over his eyes, all mumbles and no eye contact. At least at first, anyway. I remember he wore a gray hoodie most days, stained at the sleeves like he hadn't washed it in quite a while, and then he'd sit in the corner booth for hours on end, just kind of nursing some black coffee, but it was only ever a black coffee. And I didn't think much of him at first. People come and people go, but this particular guy just sort of kept staring at me. Not in a flirty sort of notice me way either. His eyes were cold, like he was studying me or maybe even sizing me up. Then came the night that I caught him watching me through the window as I locked up, and I told myself that it was nothing, just some weirdo lonely guy who thought that I was pretty and hadn't been taught that it was rude to stare. But it wasn't long before things started to get really creepy. About a week later, I found a note slipped under my front door. It was sort of scrawled on a torn piece of notebook paper, and it said, "You look pretty in blue today." My work uniform wasn't blue, not at all, but what had actually been blue were the underwear that I'd been wearing that day. And in that moment, my stomach dropped. I lived alone. No one was supposed to know what I was wearing underneath, and my uniform didn't show anything off either. I checked the locks, the windows, and everything seemed fine. I threw the note away and told myself that it was nothing, maybe a prank, possibly by some local kids, I guess. And I tried to reassure myself with stuff like that, but it didn't work, and I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow. And things got way, way worse over the weeks that followed. I started seeing the guy everywhere. Not up close, just glimpses here and there at a distance. A shadow across the street when I walked home. A figure standing under the streetlight outside my house at night, but I really never knew. I didn't always see his face, but it really felt like it was him. Once, I swore that I saw him in the grocery store 2 aisles over peeking through the cereal boxes, and I turned to look, and he was already gone. I knew that I was probably being paranoid and that I was imagining things. Overworked, overstressed, no sleep, all that kind of stuff. But the notes kept coming. And it would say stuff like, "I like your hair down. You shouldn't leave your curtains open." And, "I'm closer than you think." Each note, in this childlike handwriting of his, it made my skin crawl a little more each time I got one. And on the advice of a friend, I stopped throwing them away, and instead kept them in a shoebox as proof that something was very, very wrong. I prayed things would get better, that he'd get bored of me, but the situation got even worse as time went by. I'd hear footsteps behind me on my way home from work, but when I turned, no one was there. My trash cans started getting knocked over, and once I found a dead bird on my porch. Its little neck had been snapped and its feathers were all over the steps where somebody had apparently been ripping them out. And the notes get even creepier too. "I can hear you breathing at night," or "You can't hide from me." And I almost stopped sleeping altogether. I'd sit up with the lights on, just clutching my knife, waiting for something to happen, and I knew that he was out there, watching and getting closer, and it was only a matter of time before he made his move on me. But in the end, I couldn't take it anymore and told my neighbor, Tom, about it. Now, he's an older guy, Tom. Pretty sure he's in his 50s, with a very kind face, big belly, and a loud laugh. And he lived across the street from me, and we'd always wave to each other. One afternoon, I knocked on his door, pretty much shaking at that point, and just spilled my guts about everything that had been happening. The notes, the footprints, that sickening feeling of being hunted. And I told him how scared I was, that the whole thing seemed to be getting worse and worse with each passing day, and that I was scared that the guy stalking me was going to actually end up hurting me. I remember him frowning, putting a hand on my shoulder, and told me that I wasn't alone. You see anything weird? You call me, okay? He told me. Day or night, I'll come running. I nodded, grateful for the offer of help that I don't think I can even put into words, and for the first time in weeks I felt like I actually had someone on my side. But the stalking didn't stop, and the notes slowly turned into what I perceived to be threats. I'll cut your pretty throat. No one can save you. I'm coming for you soon, it would say. I stopped going outside unless I had to, and I checked the locks 10 times a night sometimes. And then one night, he made everything fall apart. I was in my kitchen, making tea to calm my nerves when I saw him. A figure walking up my driveway. Tall, thin, moving very slowly like he didn't care if I actually saw him. And that was like his signature, I guess, how I'd always know that it was him. My heart stopped in my chest. This was it. He was actually here to kill me. Obviously, I finally ran to the phone and dialed 911. I told them that someone's trying to break into my house. My voice was shaky, and I tried to whisper, "Please hurry." The operator told me to stay calm and told me that help was on the way. But all the same, I grabbed my cell phone and called Tom, my neighbor. It rang and rang, but he didn't pick up. And I remember thinking, come on. But I still got nothing. No answer, no voicemail, no nothing. I hung up, and there was panic starting to rise up inside my chest because I knew the cops wouldn't get there in time, and I was completely and totally on my own. I had a gun, a little handgun my dad gave me when I moved out, and I've never used it, but I kept it loaded on my nightstand. I grabbed it, my hand trembling, and crept to the top of the stairs. The house was quiet, but I could feel him out there waiting. I crouched in the dark, gun just pointed at the front door, praying that the cops would show up first. And these minutes dragged by. My palms were sweaty, slipping on the grip of the gun, and then out of nowhere, bam! The door flew open, kicked hard, splintering the frame before a shadow stepped inside very quickly. And in that moment, I didn't think. I just screamed and pulled the trigger. 3 shots, loud and sharp, making my ears ring. This person grunted and fell, sprawled on the floor. I dropped the gun, and I was shaking like I'd never before in my entire life before I stumbled down the stairs. The lights were off, and I could see blood pooling on the hardwood floor, and there was lots of it too. I flipped the switch, feeling this sick kind of relief and knowing that my problems were about to be buried 6 feet deep. But when I flicked that light switch on, my entire world had fell apart. It wasn't the stalker lying there, bleeding out in my hallway. It was my neighbor, Tom. His kind face was pale, his chest torn open from the bullets, and he'd been holding a flashlight, not even a weapon. And I remember sobbing before falling to my knees. I cried out that I was sorry, that I didn't know, and he was just wheezing, blood bubbling at his lips as he struggled to breathe, and then he just went still. I pressed my hands to his chest, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was too late, and he died right there. And when the police arrived minutes later, I was still screaming, covered in Tom's blood, trying to revive him before they pulled me off. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but I already knew that there was no saving him. After I explained everything that had happened, the cops put me in handcuffs and took me to their station, and I told them everything. About that stalker, about the notes and the threats. I showed them the shoebox full of all of this evidence, and felt totally vindicated in doing so too, because it all made keeping that box of cursed paper finally worth it. I told them that I thought my stalker was at the door, that he'd come to kill me, and that I didn't think Tom had seen my calls, let alone piece together what was happening. They listened, and wrote it all down, but then instead of being sympathetic, their face was very cold, like they didn't believe me. They later told me, at around 3 a.m, that Tom died on the operating table, and all I could do was sit there in that cold interrogation room, feeling completely numb, and then I cried until I couldn't anymore. The police searched my house, my yard, the whole neighborhood. They looked into the stalker, asked me for his name, description, really anything, and I told them what I knew, that he was tall and thin with greasy hair and a gray hoodie. And they checked the diner's security footage asking my coworkers about him, but no one but me could remember seeing this guy or really have any inclination as to who he was. They went through the notes, the footprints, the dead bird, but when they came back, they said that the handwriting on the notes matched my handwriting. The footprints matched my own boots. And as for that bird, they said that I could have just done it myself. There's no evidence of anyone else, they told me. Just you. And they sent me to a psychiatrist. She's been a stern woman with glasses, scribbling notes while I talked. I told her that I wasn't crazy, that my stalker was real, and that he'd been after me for months on end. She'd asked about my life, my job, and my family, if I was lonely. I said I was fine, that I was just scared, but she didn't believe me either. And then after days of tests, they decided that I really was crazy. Delusional, they called it, unfit to stand trial. And they said that I made my stalker up, that the stress of living alone and working almost constantly broke me down, shattered my mind, and turned me into what became a killer. They then locked me in some psych ward instead of a jail, a place with white walls, padded doors, and nurses who now look at me like I'm some kind of monster. But I'm not crazy. My stalker was real. I've seen him with my own eyes. I felt him watching me. The notes, the threats, they weren't in my head. They couldn't have been. I didn't kill Tom on purpose. I swear to Jesus Christ in heaven that I thought that he was my stalker come to finally kill me, or worse. I thought killing him meant saving myself. But now he's dead and I'm trapped here. In 1988, I was 8 years old, a Mexican-American spending the summer in Mexico. My dad had warned me since childhood that it was dangerous to be out in the fields or graveyards alone, especially at night. I grew up with a fear that magic was real and alive in Mexico, particularly out in the countryside. That night, it was dark out. No electricity, only oil lamps, and I didn't know how to work one. So I just sat on the front porch in the moonlight, listening to the bugs. They were louder than usual. And then, I heard footsteps. More than one person very close. There was no way that I could have missed them when they were further away. I looked around, beginning to panic. I didn't hear any voices or any banter, just shuffling. And it got louder and it sounded like a mob. I jumped up and ran inside, tripping a few times, psyching myself out like I was suddenly in a horror movie where every stumble meant certain death. I slammed the door shut and locked it, grabbed the fireplace poker lying next to the doorway and ran into my room. No lock on that door. My window faced the moon, lighting up the room enough for my eyes to adjust. And I stood there, poker held short like a baseball bat, staring at the door for a long time. But there was nothing, and the silence made me feel slightly at ease. I walked over to my bed, about to let myself fall into it, when I glanced at the window at the last moment. There, draped in a headscarf, peering in, was a woman. I landed on my bed with a jolt, feeling suddenly vulnerable, and my grip loosened on the poker, and she was still staring at me. Then she started showing her teeth, but she wasn't smiling. My God. Then a bearded man appeared from the other side, whispering something to her. He noticed her staring into the window, then turned and saw me, and his face changed. He bared his teeth too. What were wrong with these people? Too scared to shout, I stayed frozen. Everyone in the house was still asleep, and the man lifted his hand and started pressing against the window, inspecting it. He tapped on the glass, lightly at first, and then harder, and it looked like he was about to open it. What do I do? Holding my breath, I just waited. If he broke the window, I was done for. I felt like they were about to drag me by my ankles all the way to hell. And then, common sense kicked in. I remember the poker. I grabbed it and ran to the window, swinging as hard as I could, and that poker smashed against the pane closest to the man and the glass shattered, and I instinctively squeezed my eyes shut from the shards and noise, and when I opened them again, I could hear them running away. The wind was blowing through the broken window, and there were crickets outside as well. The lights flicked on in the house. My dad and uncle rushed into my room asking what I'd been doing, and then they saw the broken window. My dad flipped out, started shouting, and asked me what the hell I was thinking, and all I could say in English was, "There were people outside. They were staring at me." And his eyes immediately went wide, and he shut up. My uncle looked confused. He didn't speak English, and my dad grabbed me by the elbow and barked at my uncle to wake everyone up and get them into the kitchen. My uncle started shouting, telling everyone to hurry, and of the 10 family members, 6 ended up in the kitchen. The other 4, my dad, uncle, and 2 older cousins, went outside armed with a hunting rifle, an old service revolver, and a couple of shovels. They were gone for maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like eternity. Inside, I tried explaining to my mom and the other women what had happened, and gossip started. My aunt started stirring things up and smirked and told the kids that it was La Llorona and her husband, and that freaked me and my younger cousin out. Mom and my other aunt shut her down, saying that she was being ridiculous, and then the men came back and nothing, and they'd check again in the morning. Nothing was stolen. No cars, no tools, no chickens. We all just decided to stay up, and there was no way anyone was sleeping after all of that. Coffee and bread went around as we sat together, just throwing out theories. Thieves, spies, La Llorona, stalkers, even skinwalkers came up. At sunrise, the whole family went outside to check things over. There was blood right outside my window, and my uncle had missed it in the dark, and my mom was audibly worried. The rest of the day passed without incident, and we stayed for a few nights, but my uncle, cousin, and dad took turns standing guard. On our last night there, someone brought a newspaper from the nearest larger town over, and it warned country folk about these roving bands of hyper-poor people breaking into barns and farmhouses, killing the owners and stealing whatever they could carry before disappearing back into the hills. 12 people had already been killed, apparently. Only one survivor, a farmhand who managed to shoot an intruder and drag himself to town, had lived long enough to tell what had happened, and the town's terrible doctor unfortunately couldn't save him. And my dad's face was grim. That's who they were, he said. Years later, I asked what he had told my uncle that night, and his answer chilled me. I told him I saw gitanos, and my uncle instantly knew what to do. I looked it up later, and I guess gitanos in English means gypsies.
I dodged being murdered by my psychotic roommate. I'm a 36-year-old female in Sweden. I have worked in mental health care for the last 18 years. I was working at a group home for 9 years and was very close with my coworkers there, especially 2 females. The last few years I worked there, another female started working there. Let's call her M, and the 4 of us grew very close. She was very shy, but we got along well. However, she was often on sick leave because of her own mental health issues, but she was able to hang out with us after work. She told us that she had a history of schizophrenia, just like the patients we were treating, but that she was medicated and hadn't had any psychotic episodes for years. In the summer of 2023, I moved on to work at a new place, this time doing forensic psychiatry. The 4 of us stayed in touch. One day, M told us she had been evicted from her apartment because of an incident where she had accidentally entered her neighbor's apartment in the middle of the night. She told us that in the huge apartment complex, the doors all look exactly the same, and that she simply walked through the wrong door by accident, which made them call the police on her. I felt that sounded out of proportion to evict someone just from that, so I questioned her if something else happened, but she claimed that was the full story. In Sweden, It's very difficult to get a contract for an apartment when you have gotten evicted, so Em asked me if she could move in with me. Since she was literally on the street, I took her in. Unfortunately, I live in a small, one-bedroom apartment with 2 cats. We decided that Em was going to stay in the living room, and she said she was fine sleeping on the couch. I hung up a curtain covering the entry to the hallway to give her some privacy. She wasn't working at this time, but I was, so I often had to get up at 6 a.m. I have really severe insomnia, and even with sleep medication, I still wake up easily. I told her I would appreciate it if she would try to stay quiet those nights when I have to get up early. The first night together, Em had been up several times that night to go out to smoke. I woke up every time. At 5 a.m., she started making coffee, and since it's literally outside my bedroom door, I was wide awake from the sounds of it. I asked her in the nicest way possible why she was up this early, like if she had any plans today, and she just said that she couldn't sleep. I gently reminded her I would appreciate it if she could wait on making the coffee until I was out of bed. Adding to why I need my sleep is that I have epilepsy that gets worse when I don't get enough sleep. I knew that I would probably get seizures at work now, meaning that this day would be both stressful and potentially dangerous. She said that she really wanted coffee with her cigarettes, but that she would try to wait the next time I have to work. I accepted it and went on with my day, but things didn't get better. She continued to wake me up early in the morning while promising she would stop. Even when I told her that the loss of sleep was literally severely affecting my health, she never respected that boundary. Not only was she disturbing my sleep, but she constantly ate through all my food. She always apologized, but it was getting expensive, and it would really ruin my mood when the thing I was looking forward to eating all day was gone. Another thing, Em had long, black hair that got everywhere. All over the sink, the floor, the bathtub, everywhere. She also left her fingernails and toenails on the bathroom floor. There were even drops of urine on the toilet seat every time she had been to the toilet. At first, I didn't want to say anything straight out, so I just put a broom and dustpan in the bathroom to imply that we needed to sweep the floor more often. This didn't seem to work, and after a while, I did have to mention it. Em promised to help out, but nothing ever changed. After a few weeks of living together, I started dating someone. He was also in a roommate situation, so we had a tough time getting any alone time. I asked Em if we could get one night to ourselves every now and then. She claimed she had nowhere to go, no friends or family. I was just asking for a few hours so we could get some quality time together. She could just go to the library or take a walk or whatever, but she still got offended by the suggestion. At dinner together one night, one of our old coworkers realized that the situation was really tearing at my mood. She offered that Em could stay the night at her place. Em made a huge deal about it, but she eventually accepted it when I offered to trade it for a night to herself in the apartment the next week. When I came home the morning from my night away, I saw that my cat's water bowl was completely dried out. There was no spill on the floor, and I had filled it to the brim the night before. I asked her how this was possible, but she said that the cats must have tipped it. My cats are overly social and usually cuddle up with strangers after just a few minutes, but I noticed that the cats withdrew from her more and more over time. And the last couple of weeks, they never left my bedroom except when they ate or used the litter box. Aside from that, I had this old saucepan from the 60s that meant a lot to me. It was my grandmother's and the only thing I have from her. Em burnt it one day and made no attempt to clean it. She just left it on the stove and went out to smoke. I found it ruined and cried. She didn't even apologize. It had probably been 2 months now, and she kept waking me up at night, kept binge eating my food, never cleaned, never left the house, scared my cats, and ruined my things. She even stole my prescription sleeping pills, lots of them, and I only get one per night. I had 20 of them in my nightstand when I left for work, and when I came home, they were gone. She denied it, which is pretty hilarious since no one else could have been there. My frustration was getting heavy. The summer heat was strong, and I felt locked up in my tiny bedroom with my 2 cats while everything just kept building up. Then, my old classmate texted me on Facebook, asking me how I know M when he saw I had posted on Facebook that we were roommates now. I told him that we were old coworkers and that she needed a place to stay because she got evicted. He asked if I understood why, and I told him what I knew, but he said that wasn't the full story. In reality, M broke in and snuck up to their sleeping baby with a knife in her hand. Luckily, the father woke up in time and wrestled her to the floor. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't want to believe it, but my friend had the full police report. It seemed that M had a psychosis episode during the break-in, but those parts weren't public. It was, however, clear to me that she had been lying to me about what had happened, including her mental stability. I started getting quite paranoid now and wanted her to move out. We did, however, have a contract that she had 30 days notice. I knew that if I asked her in a harsh way, it would mean 30 days of chaos until she moved out. So I wanted to handle this as nicely as I could. I sat her down and broke the news to her as respectfully and lovingly as I could, but she still looked crushed. I showed her a hostel I found and said that I understood it wasn't the ultimate situation, but I really needed her to move out because I felt suffocated. She said she was going to try to move out, but not until 30 days had passed, so I had to agree to that. The consequences came quickly. The first night after our talk, she got up and made her coffee at 2:30 a.m. I nearly had a mental breakdown because I couldn't fall back asleep. I asked her in the morning for probably the 10th time not to make coffee until I got up, but she didn't even answer me. She just sat on the couch and stared out the window. I called her name several times, but she kept staring. I got freaked out and just left for work. M's annoying behavior persisted and got increasingly worse, but I couldn't stop thinking about the incident with the baby and the knife. I eventually got so pissed off about being woken up by the coffee maker that I unplugged it and locked it in my car. It may be childish, but I was starting to feel I was going crazy. The very next night, I woke up at 4 a.m. by her making coffee in a saucepan. I tried talking to her again, explaining the situation, but she just stared and didn't reply. Me being frustrated and at my tipping point, I later took the saucepan and stored it in my car as well. The third night, I had the guy I was dating sleeping at our place because I was getting really paranoid over her weird behavior. I woke up from my very light snooze by him poking me and whispering at me to look at something. In the doorway, M was standing silently, staring at us. It was like a scene from a horror movie with her long, black hair over her face. I sat up and asked what she was doing, but before I could finish the sentence, she slammed the door shut. A moment later, I heard the sound of something metal falling on the floor and her running into the living room. I yelled at her to leave and started crying hysterically because this was turning into a nightmare. I couldn't go back to sleep, though I was really grateful that I had company that night. I just kept asking myself, had she done this before? The next day, when I got out of bed, I went out into the hallway and saw a kitchen knife on the floor. That was the metal sound I had heard before she ran off. I took all my knives and locked them in my car. I asked a friend of mine to come to my house and be here when I tell M that she has to move out immediately. During the conversation, I tried to stay calm. I know she has a mental illness, and I know she means no harm. Even though I was so frustrated, I couldn't hate her. I was mostly scared and tired. M, however, didn't even answer when I talked to her. She just kept staring out the window. She left the apartment and sent me a text instead saying that I was disrespectful for bringing a friend over to her place. Nighttime came and I thought this would be a quiet night finally, but at 3 a.m. I was woken up by her burning dry coffee powder in a frying pan. At this moment, I just felt terrified of her. Her face was dead, her eyes were black. I suspected that she had gone into psychosis. I put out the fire, and she just ran off to the living room in silence. I knew she had an appointment with her psychiatrist the next day, so while she was away, I packed all her things. Then, I sent her a text telling her that she needs to pick them up and give me my keys back, and that I will give her money for a hostel the upcoming 26 days. She didn't reply. The guy I was seeing came to keep me company in case she would fight about it. Thankfully, she didn't. She gave us the keys without looking at us and left. Our old coworkers told me she moved in with a guy she was dating, and she stayed there for a few weeks until she somehow amazingly got an apartment of her own. M even started working again, and I was really happy to hear this. Then in January, one of our old coworkers told me M had called her and told her that everything must burn, that she has a baby she must save, and other delusional stuff. Her coworker called to get her help, but they hadn't taken it seriously. M then proceeded to burn her entire apartment down because the voices in her head were telling her that she had to burn everything. Her neighbors tried to rescue her from the fire, but she fought them off and ran back in and poured liquor on the fire to make it burn more. She was arrested and sentenced last week for aggravated arson. She will serve her time in a mental institution for a long time, possibly forever. What's ironic is that she will probably be in the facility where I used to work and end up where she used to work herself. My old coworker was a witness at the trial. Apparently, M had stopped taking her medication because she thought that it made her feel numb, and she thought she was stable enough to function without it. Apparently not. She had also stopped taking her medication the last few weeks when she stayed at my house. So, those moments when she stared blankly into space, she was going into psychosis. When she burned the frying pan that last night, and when she stared at me with the knife in her hand. It's disturbing to think about what would have happened to me and my cats if she stayed, or if I were a heavy sleeper. I also think about what would have happened to the baby in that apartment before she was evicted. The darkness I saw in her eyes in those final days is something I will never forget.
This story takes place in November of 2017, and I was 18. I'm a very short girl, only about 4'10", and I get anxious when someone even looks at me in a way that suggests they might not like me. So needless to say, I'm incredibly non-confrontational. My friend and I were out shopping. It was something we'd do maybe every few months just to bond since we didn't have much time to hang out due to college. And she's just like me, barely scraping 5'1" and very non-confrontational. It's probably why we became friends. On every shopping trip we would find ourselves in Ann Summers. We're both overly endowed and struggled to find bras anywhere, and Ann Summers always had great sales, so we grabbed the cheap bras while we could. This shopping trip wasn't any different. We browsed shops until we got to Ann Summers, but that's when things took a bit of a turn. I'd barely stepped foot into the shop when a woman with some sort of Slavic accent stopped me, and her finger jammed into my chest. "Spit the gum out," she demanded. Assuming that she was an employee, I gave a very sheepish, "I'm really sorry," and ran out of the shop to spit the gum out and throw it away. When I went back in, I realized that this woman was not an employee. She was a customer who was browsing and happened to be near the door when my friend and I entered the shop. It should have been obvious to me at the time. No salesperson would ever behave like that, not one that wanted to keep their job anyways. But I kept my head down when I walked past her, holding my breath in hopes that she wouldn't notice me again, and she didn't, and I thought I was in the clear. My friend and I browsed the shop, trying to avoid the woman, but the shop wasn't very big, probably only 15 feet by 18 feet, so eventually I ended up at the sales stand by the door where she had been stood. I tried to keep my distance while browsing. I was looking at the price tags but realized that I didn't know what the discount was, so I leaned over slightly to check the discount sign. It's important that I note that this woman had a pushchair, which is a stroller for the Americans, and you'd think that she'd maybe had a child in this pushchair. But no, it was full of plastic carrier bags. I didn't look too much at it, but I could tell that everything in there was double-bagged and tied shut. Whatever was in those bags, she wanted to protect. This sense of protection became very relevant because when I leaned over to look at the discount sign, I was leaning slightly closer to her pushchair. I was still about 3 feet away from it, but apparently it was too close. The woman was on the other side of the chair, but the moment she saw me, she ran around to it where I was stood. She hits me in the face. It was somewhere between a slap and a punch, and I couldn't quite tell because I was in shock. All I knew is that it hurt. "Watch the personal space," she hissed in my ear, and I apologized to her. This woman just hit me and I apologized to her. I regret it now, but at the time I didn't want to provoke her any further, not that I knew what I did to provoke her in the first place. And in my shock, I turned around and ran to the back area, grabbing my friend's hand and pulling her with me. The back area was separated by a tiny wall that only stretched halfway across the shop since they stored the adult toys there and wanted to keep them out of sight of the general public. I stood there holding my friend's hand and shaking as I whispered, "She just hit me," to my friend, and we stood there for a good minute in silence, and my friend was positioned in a way that she could see the rest of the store while I hid behind the wall. "She's gone," my friend told me, and I let out a breath that I didn't even know that I was holding. "Can we stay here for a while?" I asked my friend, worried that the woman would be outside waiting for me. The front of the store was open, but she could have easily just been a couple of feet down the road and out of sight, waiting for me to leave. My friend agreed, and we slowly browsed the shop again. About 5 minutes later, we got to the counter to check out, and the girl working the counter looked outside and then back at us. "That woman's been in here for 30 minutes. I didn't know what to do." She told the two of us, "What did she say to you?" "She told me to spit out my gum when we first came in, and then she hit me because I was too close to her." "She hit you?" The worker was wide-eyed. "If I'd have known that, I would have called security. I'm so sorry." I smiled and shrugged. "It's fine." It wasn't really fine, but it wasn't the worker's fault. She didn't look much older than I did, and I wouldn't have known what to do in that situation either. And still shaken up, my friend and I made our way out of the store. I looked around but didn't see the woman. "Can we just go home now?" I asked my friend. We hadn't finished browsing all the shops, but I was so paranoid that we bumped into that insane woman again. She agreed and we got the bus home. And when I got home, my parents encouraged me to report the incident to the police, and I called the non-emergency line, and their answer was basically, "Well, what do you expect us to do about it?" And unless I went back to the Ann Summers and requested the security footage, which I wasn't sure if they actually had, they wouldn't do anything. It's been just over 3 years, and now I'm sure that that woman was likely to have been homeless and/or on drugs. It's the only explanation I can think of for the carrier bags and her protectiveness. It was either everything she owned, or drugs, or maybe even both.
I worked at Chuck E. Cheese when I was in high school. It was my first and worst job ever. The place looked seedy enough from the outside, but it was even worse behind the scenes. I was basically just a janitor, so I was at the front lines of keeping the place from becoming a total dump. The manager didn't care about anything. The arcade machines were always going out of order, the play areas were falling apart, and even the main Chuck E. Cheese animatronics didn't work right sometimes. The place only managed to stay in business because there were no other similar options in town. Technically, fixing stuff like that was part of my job description, but I was way too underqualified to do anything other than turning stuff off and on again. During the day, it was always a madhouse, but then after close, it was just me staying late to clean up by myself. One night, I had something weird happen to me. While I was sweeping through the arcade area, I noticed that in one of the claw machines, there was a stuffed animal dangling from the claw. It was clenched shut under the foot of a little lamb hovering right over the catch bin. I thought it was weird that nobody had complained about the game stealing their win, but nobody was around to collect it anymore. I opened up the case, then forcefully opened the claw and released the lamb. Almost as soon as the lamb dropped back into the pile, the claw clamped shut on my hand. It got me good. It didn't hurt much, but my hand was completely stuck for a moment. I managed to wrench my hand out. Then I shut the case and labeled the machine out of order. My heart was racing afterward. I looked around out of embarrassment, despite knowing nobody could have seen it. There was one set of eyes on me though, so to speak. The Chuck E. Cheese animatronic just so happened to be looking right at me. It must have ended up in that position when it got turned off, and then stayed like that. But it was still weird to feel like it watched me get caught up in a claw machine. Either way, the curtains should have been drawn, so I went over and closed off the stage. Then I went back to work as if nothing happened. By the time I got home, I had forgotten about the incident with the claw, but I was quickly reminded the next day. I was back at work, cleaning up a protein spill near the stage. The show was going on. There were a ton of kids between me and the stage who were watching the Chuck E. Cheese animatronic move around and do its thing. Suddenly, Chucky started spazzing out. He malfunctioned so badly, the music was skipping and he was flailing around, contorting his joints in all sorts of positions. The kids started freaking out and the adults were shouting. But then after just a few seconds, the computer controlling the show finally crashed and the whole thing stopped. The Chuck E. Cheese animatronic was frozen in an unnatural position, even for it. And once again, it just so happened to be staring right at me. I couldn't help but be even more freaked out than the night before, but I had to snap out of it and help my coworkers off the stage. There was nothing we could do for the machinery that day. I also told my manager about the claw machine, but he just waved it off and said he'd have a guy come fix it in a few days. That was par for the course for that guy though. I stayed for the rest of my shift, and as usual, I was still there cleaning after everyone else had gone home. I eventually went behind the curtain to sweep and mop up the stage. With everything that had been going on, being alone in that place felt even more eerie than it normally did. I made my way to center stage where Chucky was still petrified in that creepy pose with his arms bent back and everything, which didn't help to put me at ease at all. I was just sweeping around him when I heard something. It sounded like laughter, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It actually felt like it was coming from all around me. I shouted into the store that if anyone was there, we were closed and they had to get out. But the laughter persisted, only getting closer and closer until it was right on top of me. I had my back turned to Chucky as I looked over the entirety of what I could see of the building, but there was nobody there. Then I heard another sound, a snap from right behind me. I turned around just in time to see Chucky break off of his mount and crash right into me. He weighed 200 pounds, slamming me right to the floor and crushing me. I panicked, screaming for help. I quickly realized that nobody would be coming for another 12 hours, and if I didn't get this thing off me, I would be in big trouble. But the animatronic machine had me pinned. I had to gather all my strength and adrenaline to finally heave the thing off of me. I got to my feet, freaked out, and checked myself for injuries. Chuck E. Cheese himself had just tried to kill me. Thankfully, I wasn't seriously injured. I just had a bunch of bruises and a messed up wrist. It wasn't broken, but it hurt like hell. Chucky fell right on it as I tried to hold him back out of reflex. I stepped outside and called my boss, telling him what happened and that I'd have to leave early. He told me to finish my shift and save the tape so he could catch me in a lie about it just randomly falling over. I said I was too injured to work and that I'd probably need to file for workman's comp. That's when he fired me on the spot. I knew I could probably sue and get some money out of him, but at the time, I was ready to just be done with the whole thing. I still believe there was more than just neglectful management tormenting me in that place.
In my freshman year of college, I visited home a week before Halloween. The county fair was in town, so one night, I took my little sister and her two friends who were in middle school. The fair was fall and Halloween themed, so there was a haunted house. I had been to the fair a bunch of times, but I had never been allowed to go in there. Naturally, I tried to convince my little sister and her friends to go through it with me. They were too scared by all the bloody, psycho-looking actors lurking outside. So, I had to go along with them on all the same boring rides until eventually, they got hungry. I was the only one with money, so I was able to convince them to go through the haunted house with me by promising to buy them all whatever food they wanted afterwards. We got in line together, and I was immediately feeling the unsettling vibes of the haunted house. I couldn't help but feel like all the scare actors were staring at me, but my little sister and her friends were already terrified, so I hid the fact that I was uncomfortable. It took us about 20 minutes of waiting for everyone to go in one by one, but then, when we reached the front, the girls wanted to back out. However, I managed to make a deal with the girl that was letting people through that I would go in first and then come back around to prove it was okay, and whoever was behind them could go through ahead of them until they were ready. After settling things, I entered the haunted house alone, finding myself lost in a dark, claustrophobic maze of narrow hallways filled with fake smoke. The only lighting came from the obvious spots where some guy with a chainsaw or machete would jump out. I got scared once or twice, but it wasn't that bad as the actors would usher me forward right after. Then, as I was going down the longest stretch of hallway, I was suddenly shoved from my right. I was caught off guard and tumbled to my left, collapsing to the floor just as a door slammed shut. I was sealed off in total darkness. I wasn't sure if this was still part of the experience, so I quietly asked if anyone was there. A voice that sounded like an old woman asked in reply, "Can I borrow your shirt?" I freaked out and instantly got back on my feet. I reached for my phone to use the flashlight, but when I looked around, I realized I was in a tiny storage room filled with nothing but mannequins. They were all pointed to look at me in the center of the room, and half of them were wearing costumes like the scare actors, while the rest were completely bare. I couldn't see the exit or the woman, so I shouted at her to show herself. That's when she said, audibly smiling, "Check your eyes, dear. I'm right here." I snapped around to look at where the voice came from. She stood among the mannequins, as pale as their plastic skin, but wrinkled and sagging. She wore nothing on the top half of her body but a lacy red bra. I asked her who she was, but as I was speaking to her, the door behind me quickly opened and shut again. I turned around again to look in that direction, unable to see anything as the woman kept talking to me. She said, "My son says I should cover up because I'm too old, but you, on the other hand." I knew I was no longer alone in the room with this woman. There could have been any number of people lurking behind the mannequins, but my phone's flashlight was too useless to reveal them no matter how much I spun around looking. Finally, however, I was able to find the door I had fallen through. Just as I heard the first footsteps around me, I screamed and ran for it. I managed to get the door open with my left hand, but somebody grabbed my other wrist and started to pry my phone away. I turned to them and kicked as hard as I could. They staggered back, but in my rush to claw my way out through the door, I dropped my phone. I didn't have time to care, I just ran. Right outside the door, I collided straight into someone. We scared the shit out of each other before I realized he was just a regular person going through the haunted house. But I didn't linger. I shoved him out of the way and started sprinting back to the front. The actors kept yelling at me to stop going the wrong way, but I ignored them all. Finally, I came out the front entrance and started yelling at the attendant that something was horribly wrong. Sadly, she just looked at me like I was crazy. I realized everyone was gawking at me, trying to hold back their laughter as they thought I'd gone hysterical after getting scared by the haunted house. Then, I noticed my sister and her friends were gone. I shook the attendant until she told me that one of the actors had scared them off. Then I went looking for them frantically. I was scared to death they had been grabbed by the same people, but then I found them at a food truck. I asked them what they were doing there, and they said the man inside was giving them free churros. I could tell by the smile on that creepy old sicko's face that there was something sinister going on with him too, so I ripped them all away and took them home. They complained the whole way, but I wasn't going to risk being there for another second. To this day, nobody fully believes me when I tell them what happened that night. Even I sometimes catch myself wondering if the whole thing really happened the way I remember it, but I know better. That fair group is full of creeps who come to town to prey on women and girls, like that perverted old woman and her psychotic son, and that man in the food truck luring them in with free treats. The rest of the employees are just enablers who work to isolate the victims and turn a blind eye to what happens to them. When I was a freshman in college, I was still living in my rather small hometown. I hadn't decided on my major, but my passion was in theater. However, the school didn't have much of a theater program, and outside of that, there were few, if any, acting opportunities in town. Then, one day, I saw a flyer calling for volunteer scare actors for the haunted house at the upcoming fall festival. Obviously, I jumped on the opportunity, even though it wasn't a paid gig. In the weeks prior, I went out to rehearse my role. It was a super low-budget operation inside a small warehouse, and the entire haunted house was a set put together with paper-thin walls. I was meant to be a vampire, but unfortunately, not a genuinely scary-looking one, but a classic Dracula-style vampire. I was supposed to jump out at people from my hiding spot, do some vampiric hissing and screaming while baring my vampire teeth, then reset for the next group. It felt really cheesy, and I didn't expect it to scare anyone over the age of 10, but with the makeup and prosthetics, I was sure nobody would recognize me, so I decided to go all out. On the night of the festival, the crowd was a lot bigger than I expected, so I knew I was in for a long night. Inside the haunted house, people were coming every 30 seconds, non-stop for hours. A lot of them weren't that scared by me, but most people were startled at least. Some did act genuinely afraid. However, others just laughed at me. None were worse than these two douchebags I saw about halfway through the night. They seemed about my age, but they were piss drunk. They laughed at me hysterically when I jumped out at them, but it got much worse than that. I was about to retreat into my hiding spot when one of them recognized me and called me by my name. That's when I realized they went to my school. I tried to play it off in character and say there was nobody there by that name. That only made them laugh even harder. I had to break character and ask them to move on, so the next group didn't run into them. But as soon as I got serious with them, their attitudes changed instantly. They started stepping towards me, raising their voices and threatening to kick my ass if I ever told them what to do again. I tried to apologize and explain why I asked them to move, but that didn't go over well either. These guys started to criticize me for wanting to be an actor, making extremely homophobic remarks about the types of men that wanted to be in theater. They were seriously pissing me off, and when I saw the next group of people walking towards us, I'd finally had enough. I yelled at them to leave or they would be removed, but they only listened because there were other people watching. They walked off, staring daggers at me and talking shit under their breath, but at least they were gone. The rest of the night went along after that, and it was very busy the entire time. By the time it was over, my voice was completely shot from the hours of constant hissing and screaming. Then, at last, I heard that we were getting our final guests of the night. I listened for their approach, but it was eerily quiet. The other actors were completely failing to get a reaction. I found out why when I heard them getting close to me. Then I jumped out and screamed one last time. I froze when I saw the same two assholes from before standing in front of me. This time, they were so drunk they couldn't even stand up straight, and they were grinning with pure evil joy. The one on the left pulled a stick out from his waistband. It had been sharpened to a point like a wooden stake. He said to me that they had to come back properly armed to kill a vampire. Then he looked to his buddy and asked if he was supposed to put it through my heart, but the other one shook his head and said it should go in much, much lower. The one with the stake said that was disgusting, but if that's what vampires wanted, then that's what he would do. He tried to step back and say something, but I didn't even get a chance before they lunged at me. One of them got me in a headlock and covered my mouth while the other dragged me by my legs into my hiding spot. They drew the curtain and took me to the ground as I tried to fight back, but I couldn't break free or even make a sound. All I could do was try to kick them away as the one with the stick tried to rip off my costume. He told the other one to squeeze my neck tighter so I would stop fighting, and I immediately felt the pressure cutting off the circulation to my brain. My legs flailed as I looked at these two monsters just waiting for me to pass out. But then in my struggle, my foot bumped into the wall. I heard the hollow sound and remembered how thin they were. So I turned my leg to the side and kicked straight through it. They tried to grab my legs and stop me, but by then, the next actor had already seen what was happening. They started calling for help as my attackers tried to escape, but they were caught trying to leave the building. Soon after, the cops at the festival arrived. I expected those animals to be arrested, but the cops just let them go, saying it was only a practical Halloween joke, as if I was being dramatic about what those monsters were trying to do to me. I see these two at school almost every day now, and they're always smiling at me like psychopaths. They know they got away with it, and they know they could do it again if they wanted to. Before they get another chance, I'll be getting the hell out of there. My original plan was to get my bachelor's degree at home, but as soon as I get an associate's degree, I'm transferring so I'll never have to see their faces again. I was 19 when I broke up with my boyfriend of 3 years. He was abusive during our entire relationship, and when I finally managed to end things, he left me traumatized and took all my friends with him. In my freshman year of college, I got in with an entirely new group of friends who didn't have any connections with my ex to my knowledge. At the start of our sophomore year, one of my new friends got their first apartment. Once we were settled in for the new semester, they finally planned their housewarming party in mid-October. By then, the local amusement park had started their annual Halloween event, so they had everyone get tickets to it for the day after the party. In fact, the entire party was Halloween themed, which I absolutely hated. I had always been easy to scare, especially while still recovering from years of abuse, so I was the opposite of thrilled when they put on a horror movie. I had to sit through the entire thing while basically hiding under a blanket. Unfortunately, when that one was finished, they put on another. I tried to convince everyone to watch something else, but it seemed like nobody wanted to listen to me, so I figured I only had one option to get through the night: drink ahead of everyone else until I was drunk enough to pass out on the couch. It worked, but my nightmares were filled with demons and murderers trying to kill me and torture me. Then I woke up with the worst hangover of my life. My head was pounding. I was nauseous, anxious, throwing up and sweating out all the water I tried to drink. My friends just let me suffer through it, but they also dragged me out to a diner for a late breakfast. The smell of their food was enough to make me gag, so unsurprisingly, I wasn't able to get anything down. At this point, I was dreading the Halloween event, but I couldn't find a way to tell anyone I didn't want to go, especially because someone else had paid for my ticket. I felt like I was forced into the park that night. Then, before we could even get in line for a haunted house, some psycho with a chainsaw ran up on us. We all screamed, but everyone else was quickly laughing it off while I was still fighting off a panic attack. Unfortunately, things didn't get better in the relative safety of the line into the first haunted house. I started catching glimpses of someone, like I was being haunted. I kept seeing my ex-boyfriend in the park, peeking around corners and standing among moving crowds of people. Whenever I went to look at him, he disappeared. One of my friends noticed that I was still freaking, so when they said something, I asked them if they had seen my ex around. They just laughed and said that was ridiculous. Something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't be sure of anything. We were approaching the front of the line rapidly, and before I knew it, the 5 of us were plunged into the horrors of the haunted house. Freaks were jumping out at us left and right, screaming about killing us and ripping us apart. I stayed in the middle of the group and looked down at the ground the entire time. Eventually, we entered a small metal room. There was blood everywhere and a torture chair in the middle, guarded by a masked man holding a circular bone saw. Instead of chasing after us, he started talking, only to ask which one of us we would like to see cut open. I could barely comprehend what was happening before I heard giggling. Then the girls behind me pushed me to the front. I stumbled straight into the masked freak as he revved the saw in my face. I screamed and ran away, but I was trapped in the room with them. I backed myself into a corner, begging for them to stop, but then I felt something familiar. A hand laid across my shoulder and squeezed. I looked back to see my ex-boyfriend standing behind me. He was smiling as he reached to put his arms around me. I fell to the ground instantly, scrambling back toward the group as I screamed at the top of my lungs and pointed to the corner. Everyone just looked at me like I was insane and said nobody was there. I thought they were screwing with me, but when I looked again, he was gone. I heard everyone start to laugh, but I noticed an emergency exit and ran away. I got let out into some random part of the park where I found a small alley to hide in. My friends were blowing up my phone, laughing and asking if I was schizophrenic or something. I ignored them all and called my mom to pick me up and take me home. That night, I had the same horrible nightmares as the previous night, only this time, all my new friends were watching me scream for help and just standing there laughing at me. At one point in my nightmares, I was killed. My eyes shot open, but I couldn't move. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe either. All I could see was my ex-boyfriend crawling through my bedroom window. I finally caught my breath and screamed as loud as I could. The next thing I remember is my dad bursting into the room, but my ex was gone, and the window was only open by an inch. I don't know if I blacked out from fear and didn't remember him leaving, or if it was just another nightmare. It's been a few months, and I don't associate with any of those people anymore. However, I still wonder what really happened. To be honest, I don't know if they actually set me up like that, or if I just let them stress me out to the point that I had a mental breakdown. One thing that's strange to me is that my ex had been persistently trying to reach out to me for months, but then he stopped that same night. All I know is I won't let people treat me like that anymore, and I won't go into another haunted house for the rest of my life. I took my wife and kids to my parents' ranch out in the sticks. They have a huge property out there that my kids love to play on, and a great house that my wife wants us to move into. The only problem with this one trip was that my wife invited her parents to stay with us for the weekend. I love my wife, but I loathe her mother. It only took her a few hours to piss me off so badly I couldn't even be around anyone. I wasn't able to sleep that night either. I just kept cussing my mother-in-law out in my head. Around 4 in the morning, I decided to go for an impromptu hunt. I didn't even care about catching or shooting anything. I just wanted to avoid my in-laws for the day. I always take my gear with me to my parents' place in case I get the itch to go hunting or camping. So I loaded up, left a note from my wife, borrowed my dad's old bolt-action rifle, and headed into the woods before dawn. I made my way to one of the blinds I used to hunt from when I was younger, where I climbed up and got situated, then quickly started to feel sleepy, so I figured I'd take a nap until daybreak. However, I was awoken soon after by the strangest noise I'd ever heard. I couldn't tell if an animal was dry heaving or if someone out there was laughing. It was just these awful, guttural shouts. I stood up quietly and looked outside. Dawn was approaching, so there was a tiny glow of light, barely enough to make out anything. I spotted something through my scope a ways away, but I only got a glimpse of it before it darted behind a tree. I couldn't believe it, but it looked like a person, so I sat there and stared at that tree, waiting for something to appear. I didn't want to shout in case it was actually something I wouldn't want to scare away. Eventually, It was full daylight out and nothing had happened. I gave up, figuring I had just imagined it was more than it was in my groggy state, probably just a sick animal that climbed up a tree. By then, I was getting hungry, so I set up my little camp stove inside the blind. I know it's not the safest thing and the smell of food can drive away deer, but I really didn't care about anything but being alone. I had brought with me some trail mix, some chili that my dad made, and of course some instant coffee. I got the water heating up for the coffee first while I snacked on the trail mix. The sound of the stove burning was quiet, so I could still hear what was going on outside. The water wasn't even warm before I started to hear something. It was movement, nearby and fairly large. I grabbed the rifle and looked outside, but I couldn't see anything in that direction. I thought maybe I'd moved too loud or the smell of gas drove it away. However, just a few seconds later, I heard the same noise again, even closer this time, but out the other direction. I looked over and again saw nothing. Frustrated, I lowered the rifle and stepped away from the wall, only to hear something from outside the door. I looked through, and this time, there was something out there indeed, but it wasn't what I had hoped for. 30 feet away, the face of an old man was peeking out from behind a tree. He was smiling with no teeth in his mouth, just red, swollen gums. His skin was gray and greasy, and he had no hair on the top of his head but a thin gray wisp. The sight of him shook me, causing me to trip backwards, spilling hot water and trail mix all over the floor of the blind. I rushed to turn the stove off before it burned the whole thing down, and in just those few seconds, the man outside had closed the distance between us. I was still on the ground when he opened the door. Standing over me, he looked even more harrowing. He looked like a skeleton, with nothing on except a filthy pair of tattered briefs. I scrambled and reached for the rifle, expecting him to come at me, but then he immediately hit the deck and started eating all the spilled trail mix. Trapped in there with him, I just crawled back into the corner with my rifle in my hands and watched him lap up every single piece and swallow it whole like a dog. I couldn't fathom what I was looking at. A human? An animal? Something else? Would it turn to eat me when it was finished? Sure enough, when all the food on the floor was gone, the man looked at me and started crawling. He was staring into my soul with his mouth open, making those same horrible grunting, heaving sounds I heard earlier. Panicking, I grabbed the container of chili sitting next to me and opened it, then quickly slid it over. The man picked it up, smelled it, then stuck his tongue out and licked across the entire surface like he was marking it. In less than a minute, the man drank the entire container and licked it clean. It was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. When I realized he was about to demand more food and I didn't have any, I took the last opportunity while he was distracted and bolted out of the blind. I took only the rifle, letting him dig through the rest, and I ran all the way back to the ranch. I'd rather deal with my mother-in-law than find out the extent of danger I was in with that nasty freak in the woods. I told my family about it and reported it to the sheriff, but everyone seemed to kind of just laugh it off. The deputies did search the area around my parents' house, but they never found any trace of the man. To this day, I still have nightmares about him. What if I hadn't brought food? Would I have been on the menu? Does that man just live in the woods around my parents? All I know is I'm never moving back there to find out. It was late October, and I'd finally cleared my schedule enough to schedule a weekend getaway. Hunting had always been a way for me to clear my head and just get away from all the stresses of life. I'd rented a cabin deep in the woods that seemed perfect from the pictures online. The road leading to the cabin was a narrow dirt road. I pulled up to my cabin just as the sun was rising. The air was fresh and the woods were dead silent, broken only by the crunch of my boots as I unloaded my bags from the car. A little too silent. I couldn't hear the birds chirping or squirrels running up and down the trees. Not even the leaves were rustling. It felt like the woods had been frozen in time. I shrugged it off and let myself into the cabin. It was modest, One a room with a small kitchen, a creaky twin bed, and a fireplace. The place was dingy and dirtier than the pictures had shown, but it would do just fine. I unpacked, loaded my rifle, and headed out into the woods. I wandered north, searching for signs of deer. Hours passed, but I found absolutely nothing. I'd been hunting in this area before, and it had been full of all kinds of wildlife. Now, there didn't even seem to be any bugs chirping around. Gave me the creeps, but I pressed on, not wanting my trip to go to waste. Finally, when the sun was setting and just as I was about to turn back, I heard noises ahead. I scurried forward, hoping to catch the animal before it got away. That's when I saw them. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards away, was a group of people gathered around a fire. There were 6 or 7 of them, all wearing dark robes with hoods that obscured their faces. They stood in a circle, chanting in low, guttural voices that didn't sound like any language I'd ever heard. I froze. The people hadn't noticed me. They swayed in unison, muttering on and on. My heart pounded in my chest. I clutched my gun tight. I knew these people were bad news, so I slowly began to creep backwards. I went very slowly, careful not to step on a twig or rustle a leaf. When I was far enough, I turned and sprinted straight for my cabin. My mind raced the whole way there. Who were those people? What were they doing out here? I got back to my cabin and ran for the door. I pulled out the key and grabbed the doorknob, but to my horror, the door pushed open. It had been left ajar, but I knew for sure that I had shut and locked it before I left. My stomach twisted as I stepped inside the dark cabin. I turned on the light and saw my bag had been overturned, the contents dumped along the floor. My sleeping bag had been ripped off the bed and torn down the middle. Someone had broken into my cabin. I scoured the inside with my gun, making sure no one was inside. Once I confirmed it was empty, I shut and locked all the doors and windows again. I gathered up my stuff, ready to get in my car and get the hell out. And then it started storming. Not just a light rain, it felt like buckets of water were being dumped on the roof of the cabin. Thunder struck constantly. I thought back to the sketchy dirt road I'd driven in on and realized I didn't want to take my chances on it, even if that meant staying in these woods. I heated up some food in the fireplace but didn't feel very hungry. Every noise I heard outside made me jump, thinking of those weird, robed people and who could have broken into my cabin. Exhaustion started to catch up with me. I crawled into bed, still clutching my gun. My nerves wouldn't let me fully relax, but eventually, I fell asleep. I woke up to the sounds of voices. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The low chanting was faint, almost drowned out by the pounding rain in my ears. But as I sat up, it grew louder. I clutched my rifle and crept to the window. They were outside. The same group I'd seen in the woods was now standing in a loose circle around the cabin. Even through the rain and walls of my cabin, I could hear their guttural chants. Goosebumps rippled on my arms, and my heart hammered in my chest. I slammed open the window and shouted into the rain, "Get the hell out of here!" They didn't flinch. They just kept chanting, "Get out of here or I'll shoot!" I slammed the window, brandishing my weapon through the glass. I grabbed my phone and called the cops. They told me they'd send a car out as soon as possible. I spent an agonizing 20 minutes keeping an eye on the robed figures through the rain. About 5 minutes before the cops came, the figures disappeared into the woods. The cops came. They scanned the surrounding area but found no trace of the cult. They followed me back into town and assured me that it was probably just kids playing a prank on me. I want to believe him, but deep down I know something more sinister was going down that night. I used to live in a remote rural area, so my dad took me hunting for the first time when I was still a kid. After going quite a few miles from the house on ATVs, the trail split and it became too small. My dad told me to hike a mile down one path to find a blind marked with a red ribbon, while he went down the other way. He said it was better to have one man per blind as we'd be quieter and have a better chance at seeing a deer. I was fairly confident being in the wilderness, but I'd never been that deep. The trees there were older and larger than I was used to, and there were less shrubs because the canopy shaded the whole area. The sounds out there were more intense than I'd ever heard. There didn't seem to be a single moment without the wailing of some bird. For the first time ever, I truly felt that the forest was alive, and I was the hunter coming to kill the prize beast at the heart of it. The creatures I encountered felt like spies, peeking at me before scurrying away to report my location. Who they answered to, I didn't know, but armed with my rifle, I was sure I could take them out if they caused me problems. By the time I spotted the red ribbon on the blind, the sun had been up for well over an hour. I took the ribbon down off the blind, unsure if the deer would notice it. Then I crawled inside to get warm. The day was just beginning. I would leave at 4 o'clock and regroup with my dad before the sun went down, but that was hours away. It was then that I realized what this kind of hunting entailed. I had to be as quiet and still as possible, constantly on the lookout for game. In the beginning, I was still enthusiastic. I kept a sharp eye on every angle into the woods, watching and listening for any sign of deer or perhaps something more dangerous like a coyote or even a bear. I figured I'd take a coyote for my first kill and spare my chickens one more predator. As the hours dragged on, however, my perspective changed. I was bored and restless and sick of the cold. The only things I'd seen were birds or squirrels. I started to doubt that this section of the forest was any more active than my own backyard. In the final hour, I told myself that even if I didn't get a deer, I'd kill the next thing I saw. The sun was getting lower, making this dark and cold forest even more miserable, even more deserving of losing a resident. That's when I finally saw something. I heard it first. It was lumbering behind the trees, huffing with some kind of attitude. I knew it was going to be big, but I was blown away when I saw a massive stag emerge in my sights not even 50 feet away. I tried to line up the shot, but in my excitement with freezing hands, I was shaking too much. I decided I needed to wait until it got closer since it was heading towards me. Then, to my amazement, I heard more motion next to me. I looked over and saw another deer, this time a doe. They were headed towards each other, like they were going to meet. I watched them both draw nearer until they were barely 20 feet apart, and finally close enough for me to confidently take a shot, only now my nerves were even more haywire. I simply couldn't steady my hands. I tried to regulate my breath and get a hold of myself, but then the forest started to terrorize me. Every single bird and bug seemed to be screaming. Even the squirrels were screaming. A wind blew into the blind from behind the deer, chilling me to the bone. The woods were creaking like mad, like something was going to come crashing down on top of me. I tried to ignore it all and looked back through the scope, deciding which one I should go for, thinking I might get both if I shot fast enough. I looked at the stag, then the doe, the back of the stag, and that's when I saw something I'll never forget. Standing between the deer was a dark figure. It was like a woman with no face, but I could feel her gaze. She was freakishly tall, but in the setting sunlight, I couldn't make out any details. It was like she was just a smudge on the lens of my scope. It's not real, I thought, and squeezed the trigger with my sight set on the stag, only for the rifle to jam. I instantly felt the forest collapsing on me. Both deer looked in my direction, and the figure behind them was coming towards me, bringing dusk and darkness with her. I panicked and ran out of the blind, abandoning everything. I was too scared to look back and see that thing chasing me, so I just ran. I don't know how close or how far that thing was from me, but I didn't stop until I got back to the fork in the road. My dad was already there, waiting for me, asking what the hell was happening. I tried to explain it to him, but he thought I had just wimped out of the kill, so he made me go back with him to retrieve the rifle. Unfortunately, I hadn't set up the marking ribbon, so we weren't able to find it before it got too dark. We had no choice but to go home. I refused to ever go hunting again, which was a major disappointment to my dad. He kept going back to try and find that blind again all season, but he was never able to get that rifle back, and he always blamed me for it. He just doesn't understand what I saw. There was something in that forest that didn't want me to kill those deer. I don't know what it would have done if the rifle hadn't jammed. I just hope my dad never runs into that thing.